At a recent private tour at the 17th Church of Christ in downtown Chicago, our tour guide Cynthia told us that the building rests on three pie-shaped city lots, consists of 7 levels, and is clad in travertine marble. She said the Bible is their pastor, and they believe that sin is curable and that we experience salvation in this lifetime. When I first became disillusioned with church, my church friend said, "Well, if you leave church, well, then where will you have your funeral?" I've recently learned that I don't need to live my life worried about where I'm going to have my funeral. And now I've learned that there's this thing about having my salvation that I can experience that in this lifetime. It's all news to me. Even when it's good news, I always seem to be the last one to know. Welcome. Welcome to Sunday Coffee Hour. I'm Stanley Smith. At Sunday Coffee Hour, we talk about everything and nothing. This week, we talked about seeing a rheumatologist, how every office needs to have a designated person to actually get things done. We also talked about crimes done in harmony and discriminating against the discriminated. The readings at Washington National Cathedral were from Genesis. Don't be afraid. I will forgive all your crimes. And from Romans, who are you to pass judgment on the works of another? Let all be convinced in their own minds. And the gospel reading was from Matthew. When we forgive 7 times 70, then the Lord will have mercy on us and forgive all of our debts. At Washington National Cathedral, the sermon was by John Meacham. John preached about how the history of the world and the gospel both bear out God's message in the world, and also about the topic of forbearance, that forbearance provides the space for the story of our lives to be played out. Mr. Meacham is a history scholar and preacher. He cited Benjamin Franklin, who said he believed that there was one God, but he was not so sure about the divinity of Christ. But since he was closer to the end of his life, he wasn't going to give that much thought because he'd be finding out really soon. John said forbearance doesn't often live out in action because it's more passive. And instead, we live in a system that runs on criticism. Throwing punches and making an attack is more akin to what most of us face in our day-to-day living because it's so much easier to see that as a threat instead of seeing love and forbearance heading toward us. But that's what love does. It comes at us when we least expect it. It's easy to feel threatened and trespassed upon instead of feeling the love. We're quick to see the villain and good guy instead of the larger, overarching story of the history of the world and the gospel. We have our Declaration of Independence. We think it's an ideal to live up to, when in fact, it's a reality we're already living in. History tells us when we forgive, we have an open hand and not a fist. Humility is the first casualty of a world in constant conflict. We don't have commandments for things that are already happening. We have them to create the space between the reality we're in and the reality we really are in. At St. James Cathedral here in Chicago, Christopher Griffin preached about forgiving people 7 times, 7 times. Chris asked, who's counting? Who's counting how many times we've been wronged and how many times we've wronged others? Chris said we all see the hypocrisy, especially in the church, because the world looks to the church to act differently. The world expects the church to offer reconciliation instead of going around pointing out differences. Chris asked, who's holding us back? Who's holding St. James back? Those who abstain do so for the Lord, and those who eat do so with thanks to the Lord. Why do we pass judgment on our brothers and sisters? Chris said we all have family problems, and we deal with them as a family. Last week at National Cathedral, Jan talked about how we sometimes mistakenly try to spare people the hurt and pain of conflict by pretending there's not a conflict. It doesn't usually work out well. Everything is going to cost us something. What have we done in our lives that cost us something? Was it worth it? How much did it cost? Is anyone really counting or keeping track? There are many burdens in life. Thomas Jefferson said it's easier to suffer burdens than to stand up to evils which have become sufferable. Chris, he did. He asked us, what's holding us back? And what is holding St. James back? St. James is poorly attended, yet they see themselves as wildly successful. It's an interior work. What would actually fill the pews at St. James? That's what I was wondering during the service. And whatever would fill the pews probably is about something other than an interior work. Perhaps Chicago is what's holding St. James back. Perhaps it's not the fertile ground of those willing to do the interior work. Or perhaps it's the fear that many collective efforts represent, that it runs the risk of being hijacked by an agenda of power and control. Perhaps this is what people cite as the reason for not attending church, because it's judgmental and hypocritical, because they see it as having become about something else. But not at St. James. The pews are not filled with the interlopers of success. Lisa said so much at the opening of the service when she said, this space is for all of you entering this sacred place, for all of those looking for a spiritual experience. It's obviously not for everyone. And that probably is the success of St. James and many other churches. At the Christian Science Church, they document healing with evidence and eyewitnesses because they see healing as foundational to the story of Christ. In the novel Under the Tuscan Sun by Frances May, it tells a story about a husband and wife restoring an Italian villa. True to the form of a novel, it tells a story and a history of a particular time and place. It's the story about doing something and finding something, restoring a villa and finding faith by visiting the Romanesque churches which dot the surrounding countryside. We all have a life to live and a story to tell. Visiting churches isn't for everyone, but wherever your journey takes you, be aware that you are telling the story of your life and experiencing salvation right here in this lifetime. No need to live your life worried about where to have your funeral, because it's all about the healing and salvation you're experiencing in this lifetime. Even if you've been kept in the dark on all this, eventually it will find you. If you would like to join us at Sunday Coffee Hour is every Sunday at 12 noon Central Time on Zoom. I will include my email in the description of this video. I'll be happy to send you an invitation. And I look forward to seeing you very, very soon.